You're listening to the Blue Lies Podcast, where we uncover the truth about America's cops.
Imagine an America without law and order. A mobocracy where the government submits to the demands of domestic terrorists, where criminals are glorified and police are vilified. Imagine an America where good is evil and evil is good, and the fascism our forefathers died to defeat is championed. Sadly, this is our America, an America that is turning our police into the enemy. Headlines read, "Officers assaulted Birmingham," posted on social media. Criminals paid in San Francisco for not shooting anyone. NFL honors gunman who live-streamed police pursuit and shot at cops. School resource officer fired for her thin blue line flag. This is just the beginning of the war on justice and America's cops. But one retired cop is speaking out. I'm Jeff Wolf. I spent 20 years in the law enforcement community, and now I'm standing up for America's cops. Join me for the next few minutes for the Blue Lies Podcast. Thanks for joining me today for this episode of the Blue Lies Podcast. I am excited to have my special guest, Glenn Topping. He is a retired deputy sheriff from Broward County, Florida. He spent 13 years as a hostage negotiator. He spent time in the security industry for the entertainment business, and he was on the inaugural season of our favorite show, Cops. So it is a pleasure to have him with us today. He has a wealth of information and wisdom from his days in law enforcement, and obviously has something to say about the current events taking place in what I have called the most serious war on police that this nation has ever seen. Glenn, thank you for joining me today as you are sitting in South Florida in the heat and the sun, and I'm sitting in Cincinnati in the cold and rain.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
So obviously you've been watching the news as I have for the last 2 years, and although the war on police is not new to the last 2 years, it has increased and has ramped up a great deal in the last 2 years, beginning with what we call the summer of love, if you will, the summer of riots, following the unfortunate and unlawful death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police officers. I always start this conversation when we bring up that incident by saying nobody hates bad cops more than good cops. And although I don't believe that particular incident was intentional, I believe it was negligent. Unfortunately, anytime something like that happens, even if we go all the way back to the incident of Rodney King back in, what was that, the 90s, it gives a black eye to all of law enforcement, and that's what this particular incident did as well with the death of George Floyd in custody of police. And so it causes us as police officers, as the law enforcement community, our brothers and sisters, to have to fight a media battle. Well, I don't know about you, but when I went through my training to become a police officer, I was not taught how to fight a media battle. And when you got started, probably the only way that you were going to be on video is either the news or a crew from cops had to follow you around. Well, now everybody has a video camera on their phone they carry in their back pocket. So everything is on video now. And usually what you see on a daily basis, whether it's on the news or social media, you see a clipped, edited version, usually right in the middle of the ugly part of an encounter with a police officer, but you don't get the entire body of evidence, which includes the entire event. And so judgment is made on that. Now, before we became so disgusted with cops that we took shows like Cops off the air and Live PD off the air. We didn't take down any of the violent movies, mind you, and we didn't get rid of any of the violence perpetrated by our television shows and the cinema, but we got rid of the television shows Cops and Live PD. So now what you get is what people are recording. And as I said, most of the time, it doesn't tell the entire story. I could go all afternoon and give you examples of video that is being relied upon to draw conclusions about use of force encounters or otherwise tense encounters between the public and the police. And we draw conclusions and perhaps jump to conclusions from those videos without knowing the entire story. And so police officers are being unjustly judged by the public. But what's worse than that is that police officers, because of these types of videos, are being unjustly judged by the judicial system. And as you're well aware, there have been many incidences, and these incidents continue to rise, of due process being completely eliminated when it comes to dealing with a police officer who is involved in a use of force, such as Officer Garrett Rolfe in Atlanta, when he was fired within 24 hours and indicted within 5 days before the Georgia Bureau of Investigation could even start an investigation into the shooting of Rayshard Brooks. So that's a growing trend. Now, the benefit I have of having you on the show is that you began your career in law enforcement before I could even think about beginning a career in law enforcement. And you, having retired in 2009, are still not that far removed. You have a wealth of diversity in your experience, from being a road deputy, just handling calls for service, all the way up to being a hostage negotiator. And I want to hear what you see when you look at the state of the police business today.
I see that the police around the country are being unjustly crucified, mainly by our elected officials in Congress. They talk out of both sides of their mouth. Most of them want to defund the police, but then the president stands up and says, no, we want to keep them on. We want to pay them more money. We need more cops. So whenever I'm watching TV and I see some of these videos, like you brought up, about you only see partially as to what happened, I'm screaming at the television. And my wife's, what are you yelling about? I said, look, they're unjustly attacked, or they're unjustly arrested. There's no evidence of anything yet, of any wrongdoing. There's no due process by anybody. There's no assumption of innocence. Right away, you're guilty. Let's put them in jail. And it's horrible, and it doesn't get any better. And hopefully, maybe November comes around, things will get better.
Well, we're talking to Glenn Topping, retired deputy sheriff from Broward County, Florida. Today, he spent time as a hostage negotiator. He spent time in the entertainment industry as security, and has a wealth of experience and knowledge in law enforcement. He is sitting in sunny Florida while we sit up here in cold, rainy Cincinnati. Glenn, when you were on Cops, the inaugural episode, not the inaugural episode, but the inaugural season, when you were being followed around by a crew, obviously that was new then. You didn't have the opportunity to be on television outside of the news prior to the show Cops being aired. What was it like when you had that camera crew following you around? Did it make you think twice before you open your mouth? Did it make you second guess yourself at all when you were making those decisions out on the street with a car full of cameramen and producers?
Actually, no. When I was doing that in 1989, the cameraman was sitting next to me and the sound guy was sitting behind me. And when I first started it, they said, listen, do your job. Forget that we're here. Mm-hmm. Don't do anything you normally wouldn't do. Right. And I didn't. I did my job, good or bad. They filmed it. And of course they edited out what they needed to edit out. Right. But I didn't have them interfere with me at all. But they was told, don't get involved with the police also. If they get into a fight, don't help out. They don't want them involved. But yeah, I had no problem with them. We got along fine. And the episodes I was on were pretty interesting.
Well, I'm looking forward to watching those. I have not had the opportunity opportunity to do that. How many episodes were you featured on in that first season of Cops?
I think I was on 5 or 6, I think.
All right.
I got them to send me a few of them that they could find. And it was kind of funny looking at them all these years later, thinking like, boy, I'm glad there were no cameras back then.
Right. The state of the police business today, as we have discussed, has just gone terribly downhill. As we discussed off camera, you can't hardly look sideways at someone now without being terribly unfairly scrutinized. And what's happening all over America, specifically in the big cities, is that the police are literally having their hands tied when it comes to crime, specifically violent crime. Now, we all know about Seattle and what happened in Seattle back in 2020 in the summer of riots. An entire precinct under siege and set on fire. I just read a headline this morning that Seattle's crime surge is spreading across the state thanks to liberal, progressive policies. In other words, as I read the article, it basically points to the legislation that has defunded their police, that has basically given more rights to the offenders than to the victims. They have liberal light on crime judges, and it's created a murder rate that's doubled since then. Their violent crime rate is through the roof. And it's not just in Seattle. This is happening in every major city where the police were defunded or there are liberal mayors, council members, leadership involved, to the point where many of them are wising up and realizing the mistake they made in calling to refund the police and trying to backtrack now. But in Seattle, it's not just confined to the city limits of Seattle. It is literally spreading across the state as well, as if we could keep these kinds of policies contained within the corporation limits of a major city. Now, you worked in a large department in a metropolitan area, most of it. Obviously, you worked the unincorporated areas around a major city in Broward County. But I worked in a smaller agency, less than 50 people on the outskirts of the city of Cincinnati. And so our experiences in terms of politics may be a little different, but I would venture to say that our experience in terms of our interaction with the public and with offenders is probably pretty much the same, because there's one thing that doesn't change. Department size changes and population changes, but aggravated stupidity doesn't change. Would you agree?
Very much so.
I always said that if aggravated stupidity were a misdemeanor, everyone would go to jail or get a ticket at least once in their life.
Yes.
And what I see now in the news is that people are getting much more brazen with their attacks on police. Now, as we know, attacks on police are not just confined to physical confrontations with the police or a policeman dying in the line of duty or being attacked physically, but the war on police can be as simple as a police officer being denied service at a restaurant, or it can be as severe as a police officer being prosecuted, or the word I prefer, persecuted, for doing their job in good faith. So the war on police spans a lot of different dynamics. But people are getting more brazen. The cop watchers, the people that will record an incident like a traffic stop with an officer for the purpose of posting on social media and trying to provoke an officer and trying to get the officer to overreact. They're getting more brazen. And in the Rodney King video was filmed from across the street 30 years ago. What a terrible black eye on American law enforcement. But now those videos are being taken while in the face of a police officer being challenged by the person doing the recording while they're engaged in trying to do their job. And so that often has the risk of distracting the police officer. It has the risk of taking the police officer's mind off of what he's doing. And there's so many bad things about this. Tell me the differences that you see in terms of the respect the public had in police for the police when you were in your heyday, if you will, compared to what you see now.
Well, first of all, I think today the cops are still suffering from the Ferguson effect. Mm-hmm. They're afraid to, step out of line because they're on video, hoping that the videographer catches something that they can put online. Look at the cops during 9/11. After that, they were heroes. They were given parades. Now it's the opposite. Now it's so out of control that I don't know why anybody wants to go into that field today. You're not backed up by anybody in your administration. You have these guys going around doing these First Amendment audits, mm-hmm. where these people sneak up on the cops while they're on traffic stops or on other calls, and they stick a camera in their face and, "What's your badge? What's your name? Mm-hmm. What are you doing?" And they're told. And I think the cops need to put handcuffs on these guys and remove them from the scene. I think these people that approach these police officers do it so they can get distracted and get something on video, see them fight for their life. And then they got a good video to post. I didn't have to deal with that back in the early 80s. You didn't have camera phones. You didn't have people walking up on you and, what do you do? You say, "Hey, get out of my scene or you're going to jail." Right. And if they didn't get out of the scene, they went to jail. There was no second, I'm not going to tell you again. I'm the fifth time I'm telling you. No, didn't happen that way back then. You either moved off the scene or you got handcuffed and taken away. Today, it's the opposite. They're afraid to approach somebody. They're afraid to, give their name and their badge number. And if they don't, they're going to file a complaint against them. And then the cops are brought in on the carpet. And it just goes on and on and on. It's very unsafe and very unfair to the officers that they're trying to do their job to the best of their ability. But sometimes it doesn't work out that way.
You hit on a key there for me. What I see is that police officers are becoming increasingly afraid to do their job, which goes back to, as you mentioned, what's been called the Ferguson effect after the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. After that happened, It was documented that police officers ramped down their proactive policing.
Yes.
They basically got in the tall weeds. And they stopped making traffic stops. Now, not completely, we understand, but there was a decline in proactive policing. Less traffic stops, less, I guess, we don't stop and talk to suspicious people anymore because then we have to answer for that. And so there were less suspicious persons checked on. You and I both know that checking on suspicious persons is one of the biggest crime prevention measures that you can do as a police officer. If someone looks out of place, they probably are.
Right.
If something looks out of place, it probably is. But we, as a profession, are afraid to even check into those things and to double check those things because we're afraid it's going to turn into something else, and we are going to be unjustly and unfairly second guessed for trying to do our jobs. And I think it's getting worse. I think cops have come to a place where the risk far outweighs the reward when it comes to law enforcement these days.
Yes.
Because as you say, we no longer have the robust support that we used to have from the public. And at times, unfortunately, we don't have the support not only of our police leadership, but of our prosecutors and of the politicians that are elected into those city councils and county commissions that we serve. So it's a catch-22. It's almost an impossible situation. But as I said on the last episode, thank God for men and women who are willing and strong enough to rise above that noise and continue to put the uniform on and go out every day, because if we remove them from the equation, if we erase the thin blue line, there's nothing to hold back the wolf from the sheep. And so I have great honor for men and women like yourself who spent several decades in that profession, and you've seen a lot. I'd kind of like to hear about one of your Cops episodes. What is your favorite incident that was, in fact, filmed and aired by the TV show Cops?
Well, there was one that that stood out that was more comical than anything else.
Those are the
where
best
we
ones.
had a shoplifting, a family of four, the parents and the two kids. We shoplifted a bunch of meat from a local grocery store, and we got behind them, and we're chasing them through the city. And while we're behind them, the kids are in the back seat throwing packs of meat at me, hitting the car with chickens and steaks and chops.
Wow.
And finally, after about 15 minutes, we got them stopped and we made the arrest. And it was just kind of funny that they're throwing all this meat at us, trying to distract us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the cameraman who was on the scene that day is now the executive producer for the Amazing Race TV show.
Wow.
And I had spoken to him several months back because I wrote a movie script I wanted him to look at. And I don't know if you remember me or not, but you were the cameraman on the Cop show back in Dania, back in early 80s. He goes, oh, yeah, I remember the great meat chase. Right? And I go, how do you remember that? Out of all these hundreds and hundreds of episodes, how do you remember that one? He goes, it was just the greatest thing in the world. I never forgot it.
That's awesome. You have written 4 books.
Yes.
So you have obviously, as a writer, I can attest to the fact you have spent a lot of time behind the pen, if you will. Tell us about your books.
All right. Well, the first one that I put together came after I wrote the movie script for it's a true crime drama called The Hurt. And The Hurt is a made up name for a rock and roll club that I worked in the 80s in South Florida. I wasn't able to use the real name because I had to get all sorts of authorizations and everything.
Right.
We had a drive-by shooting, which resulted in the homicide of one of the bouncers at closing. And to make a long story short, they left the state. They were brought back for trials. 3 trials it took to get one guy convicted of first-degree murder. The second guy, after the first trial, convicted. Both sent up to northern Florida to the penitentiary. About 7 years later, one of them gets raped in prison and contracts AIDS. And the family pleads with the governor to have him released so he can go die at home. And that's what happened to him. The other guy, about a year later, escapes prison in a laundry van and is on the run for over 10 years before the U.S. Marshals catch up with him and bring him back to prison. And then the book follows all the escapades, all the sex, drugs, and rock and roll that was going on in the 80s in the rock and roll club. And that's what that book is about. So that was a true crime drama. I wrote a sequel to that one called The Real Story Behind the Hurt and the Rise and Fall of Extremists, where the book takes place 25 years later after the club had closed, has been reopened by the original owner 25 years later. Come to find out that he's big into the Antifa and Black Lives Matter groups who hide and do all their dirty work from a lot of rock and roll clubs in the area. They hide in plain sight. Next one was Operation 1600 is a political thriller about a corrupt U.S. president that eventually gets us into a nuclear war with Russia. And the other one is called
Well, that's
Look a
eerily
Quarter.
similar to what's going on right now in the light of the
a little bit.
Russia-Ukraine war. That hits a little too close to home.
Yeah, I know. The other one is Look a Quarter. It's an autobiographical anecdotes about my crazy life growing up in New York. Follow me through my police work, through the military police, to what I'm doing today.
Wow. Well, I know you've spent a lot of time. Having written 4 books myself, it takes a lot of time.
Yes, it's a pain in the neck.
It is, but sometimes you can't help it. When you are a writer, you have to write, right?
And I'm working on the 5th one.
Wow. Well, my hat's off to you. It is a great retirement project, that it is.
Yes,
when you were on Cops in 1989, I was in high school. I don't mean to make you feel older than you already feel, but I grew up at least through those formative years, watching that show, loving that show. My uncle was a police officer, so I always wanted to be a cop, and that show was like my drug. I used to look forward to when that came on every, was it, Saturday night at 8 o'clock or something like that.
Yeah.
So I have always idolized some of those guys that were featured several episodes on Cops. I had never met you before, obviously, or never talked to you, but guys like you, and every city they went to, they seemed to follow a particular officer. Like they went to Vegas, they followed Randy Sutton, and so I've always been a big fan of Randy Sutton and Sheriff John Bunnell from Florida, and some of those guys. So it is certainly a privilege and a thrill to talk to you, who kind of run in that same fraternity, if you will. But if you were to have the opportunity to give some sound advice from someone who's been there to cops of this generation and in the midst of this turmoil, what would you say to them?
I would say, do your job, follow your training, don't lie, because the lie is going to be worse than what you did in the first place if you did something wrong. Be truthful, because your testimony in court is going to be a big deal. And if you feel like you're getting unlawful orders by somebody, talk to somebody else and see what you need to do. Try not to step on too many toes, because in today's atmosphere, here today, gone today.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's very simple yet very sound advice. I think you and I had the benefit of a strong foundation under us, while a lot of police officers today don't feel like they have a foundation, like they have to be their own advocates. When I served as a patrol sergeant, I felt it my responsibility to stand up for my people. And when they were being sometimes unjustly persecuted by administration, I felt like I needed to stand up for them.
Right.
And I think a lot of cops feel like they don't have that person anymore in their career. So they feel like they're, for lack of a better phrase, they're lone rangers. They're out there on their own. There may be bodies out there, but they're not sure who has their back and who doesn't.
Right.
My two rules in my career was short compared to people like you and a lot of other police officers that have retired. My rules were, number one, go home safe, and number two, don't end up on YouTube. Those were my two rules. And I managed to meet those two goals. But my hat's off to you, Glenn, for your career and for surviving your career. You're a true sheepdog, a true warrior, and it's been a pleasure and a privilege to talk to you today. And I think that you and I are of a growing number of former police officers who support the men and women who are currently still holding that blue line, and we just want them to know that we're behind them 100%, and we have their backs. I've often thought since I left law enforcement, and you probably know this more than I do, that once you are a police officer, you're always a police officer in your heart. That you can put the uniform down and you can turn in the badge, but you never lose that mindset. You never lose that spirit. Sometimes it takes a while to lose the muscle memory. I remember about a year after I left law enforcement, I'd be driving down the road in my Toyota truck and see somebody coming at me, and I'd reach down for the radar remote that's not there, just because it was muscle memory,
Sure.
So, but I say that to say that even though our time is over, we are still with our brothers and sisters in blue, in spirit and in heart. And I think it's my responsibility to use whatever platform I'm privileged to have to stand up for and advocate for today's law enforcement officers, and I appreciate you doing the same and being a guest on the podcast as I endeavor to stand up for police officers in these trying times.
It was my pleasure, Jeff. I really appreciate you having me on, and hopefully things will get better.
I hope the same, and I hope that maybe when I am down in South Florida again, hopefully before the year's over, that I'll have an opportunity to meet you and shake your hand.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. Have a great day, Glenn.
All right, Jeff. Thanks again. Have a good day.
You too. I hope you have been informed and educated by our conversation today. If you want to know more, the truth is uncovered in my Amazon bestseller, Blue Lies: The War on Justice and the Conspiracy to Weaken America's Cause. Get it on Amazon or at blueliesbook.com. Let our heroes know that you back the blue, and stay safe. Remember, a police officer fights not because he hates what's in front of him, but because he loves who stands behind him.